everyone, this is Casey, and welcome to House Lorebridge. Today, I'd like to discuss another A Song of Ice and Fire identity theory. Now, this character we meet in A Storm of Swords, and he also appears in A Dance with Dragons. We don't know his name or the importance that he may have to the end of the series. I'm talking, of course, about Coldhands. But before we go into who I personally think are the best two candidates for his true identity, let's refresh our memories. Coldhands is a character who first helps Sam and Gilly escape from the Whites and get south of the Wall in A Storm of Swords, and then he continues to take Bran and company north of the Wall to the Three-Eyed Crow in A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. Now we don't know his name, so he gets the name Coldhands from Sam and Gilly. In the show Game of Thrones, Coldhands is presented as being Benjen Stark, brother of Ned Stark and former First Ranger of the Night's Watch. Now, in the show, he isn't around to help get Bran and his friends to the Three-Eyed Crow's cave, but he does help Bran and Mira get back to the Wall, and he also saves Jon from a certain death when he falls into a frozen lake in Season 7. It remains to be seen if either of these events will play out the same way in the series, however. But George R.R. Martin has said that no, Benjen Stark is not the true identity of Coldhands in the series. Although this was from an early manuscript, I think we can rely on this information because George R.R. Martin doesn't give many straightforward answers to questions about the series. Now let's go over what we know about Coldhands. First of all, he's dead, and he has been for a while. As such, he can't go anywhere that is protected from the dead by magic. He also is described as having dark eyes, not blue like the Whites. Also, they are the only part of his face that aren't covered by either a hood or a scarf. His hands are black, hard, and cold, and he explains that this happens when the blood settles in the appendages after death when discussing who or what he is with Bran. He also has a murder of ravens that follow him, and Bran thinks that they appear to communicate with him. He also rides a huge elk. He also is known to speak an unknown language, which I think we could probably safely guess is the language of the First Men, which is often heard beyond the Wall. He's also speculated to be a former brother of the Night's Watch. His clothing is all black, he calls Sam brother, and he knew the secrets of the Black Gate at the Night Fort and was able to tell Sam how to open it using his Night's Watch vows. He seems to be acquainted with the Three-Eyed Crow and the Children of the Forest, and Leaf, who is one of the Children of the Forest, also tells Bran that the Whites cannot kill Coldhands because they already killed him long ago. Now, she is approximately 200 years old, so I feel like we can pretty safely guess that he's been dead for about as long, if not longer. And lastly, he seems to exhibit a bit of Stark loyalty. At one point, he refers to himself as being Bran's monster. Now, there are a lot of theories out there about who he is or could be, so I'd like to go over a few of them that I don't think are possible. The first one is Bloodraven. From the books, we can pretty safely deduce that Bloodraven is the Three-Eyed Crow, and I don't think that he can be in two places at once. It's also been speculated that he could be a member of the Raven's Teeth, who were a company who went to the Wall with Bloodraven, which I don't really see as being too possible either. We don't have many named members of the Raven's Teeth, especially who have been dead for a long time. Also, Coldhands and the Three-Eyed Crow seem to be acquaintances or co-workers. They don't seem to have any former or current bond. Another theory about his identity is that he could either be Waymar Royce or Will from the prologue of A Game of Thrones, but I don't think this is possible either because neither of these characters have been dead for very long, and once again Leaf pointed out that the Whites killed Coldhands long ago. So, here are the two candidates that I think best fit his true or former identity. First off, the Night's King. The Night's King was the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who supposedly married another and was performing dark magic and making human sacrifices. The Night's King was brought down by the King of Winter, Bran the Breaker, and the King Beyond the Wall, Joramun. Note here that Bran the Breaker was also the Night's King's brother. Some evidence for this includes the Night Fort. The Night Fort was the seat of the Night's King, so his intimate knowledge of the castle that not even a bookworm like Sam is interesting. The Night Fort is also where the story of the Rat Cooks takes place, which is a story that teaches a lesson in the vengeance of the old gods against those who don't obey their rules, among which is upholding vows. Now, if the Night's King is Coldhands, it could be a punishment for his marriage to an other, naming himself king and her his queen. All of this goes against his Night's Watch vows. Also, Bran's thought on the appearance of the Black Gate when Sam leads them to meet Coldhands is, if a man could live for 1,000 years and never die, just grow old, he might come to look like that. Then Bran and company go out to meet Coldhands, who is coincidentally hiding most of his face. Now here's what I think is some evidence against this. The Night's King has been dead since the Age of Heroes, and depending on which timeline you're looking at, that could be anywhere from 10,000 to 6,000 years before Aegon's conquest. Even if he is a magically reanimated corpse being kept alive by the maliciousness of the old gods, I think we could expect him to be in a bit worse shape than he is. When Bran wargs Summer, he thinks that he can smell the dead and rot in him, and also Bran and his friends notice that he doesn't breathe or eat, but otherwise he looks to be in pretty good shape for a dead guy. Also, personally, I think the Night's King is a bit too obvious for George R.R. Martin. On June 9th, 2015, on Westeros.org, George is quoted as saying that the Night's King is a legendary figure like Lan the Clever and Bran the Builder, and is as likely to have survived to the present day as they are. And lastly, if there's any truth to the story of the Night's King, when he was defeated by Bran the Breaker and Joramun, King Beyond the Wall, he was likely completely destroyed. And we know that the wildlings have a habit of burning their dead so that they can't return as a white. The second candidate that I think is likely for Coldhands is Brandon Snow. He is the brother of Torrhen Stark, who is also known as the King Who Knelt. Approximately 300 years ago, during Aegon's conquest, Brandon Snow wanted the King of Winter, Torrhen Stark, to fight Aegon the Conqueror and his forces. He even talked about sneaking into their camp and killing them, volunteering himself for the job. In the end, Torrhen Stark opted to make peace with Aegon and was then known as the King Who Knelt. Afterwards, some of the disgruntled Northerners went to Essos and formed a sellsword company known as the Company of the Rose. Given that Brandon Snow was all for attempting to retain Northern independence, I think it's pretty safe to guess that he likely wasn't very happy with Torrhen's decision to kneel. However, Brandon isn't named as being among those who went to Essos. Personally, I don't think he went with them. If he was important enough to be named in the history, then he should have been important enough to be named among those who went to form the Company of the Rose, if that's what happened. What I think happened is that since the North and the Starks in particular have a long history of supporting the Night's Watch, I think he would have gone to the Wall. This would, in my mind, have been appealing to Brandon Snow because, number one, he's a bastard, and so he doesn't really serve much of a family purpose to the Starks in name. Also, the politics of Westeros very rarely touch the Wall, so he still would have been mostly free from Targaryen rule. If we fast forward a few hundred years after Aegon's conquest, we see Bran in a cave with the three-eyed crow. In his dreams in the cave, one person Bran sees in Winterfell's Godswood is a dark-eyed youth, pale and fierce, and this youth is described as having sliced 3 branches from the weirwood tree and was shaping them into arrows. I think these arrows were being specifically carved for either the Targaryens or their dragons who are waiting in the Riverlands, and that this youth is Brandon Snow. If this is the case, the weirwood arrows would make a symbolic point, being from the north, and the fact that the Starks, well, the north in general, is one of the few places in Westeros that still keeps the old gods, and also it wouldn't be the first time that we've seen weirwood made into weapons such as a bow, arrows, spears, etc. It seems in Bran's dreams he is seeing back through the ages of Winterfell's Godswood. For example, he sees a younger Ned Stark, seemingly back from Robert's Rebellion. We go back a little bit farther and he sees children playing, which turn out to be Lyanna and her siblings. We see this youth, and at the end of these visions we go all the way back to seeing a human sacrifice made in the Godswood. This youth's description and his placement in the history, if you will, of Bran's dream make it seem likely to me that he could be Brandon Snow, especially because George doesn't usually show us things that are irrelevant. So the relevance of Brandon Snow here could be his new identity as Coldhands. Now, I don't have too much evidence against this theory, but I think the biggest thing that works against it is just our lack of information that is solid. Most of the information that this theory is based off of is pure speculation and trying to find a puzzle piece that could maybe fit, but it very well could end up not fitting at all. So, what do you guys think? Who do you think is Coldhands' true identity? And do you think it's going to matter for the remainder of the series? Let me know down in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.